The Fox News studio buzzed with a rare electricity that evening. The lights above the polished debate stage beamed down like interrogation lamps, catching the nervous glances of the live audience. Two women sat across from each other, Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, famous for her sharp tongue and political swagger, and Jessica Tarlov, the network's resident liberal strategist known for her precision and ability to slice through talking points with surgical calm. The segment was billed as Truth versus Spin, the Bondi-Tarlov Showdown. The host, Greg Gutfeld, introduced the debate with his usual smirk. "This one," he said, leaning into the camera, "is going to be fun." The crowd chuckled. Pam flashed a confident smile, crossing her legs as if she'd already won. She leaned toward Jessica and whispered, "Try to keep up." Jessica didn't respond, she didn't need to. She simply adjusted her mic, straightened her notes, and looked ahead, poised. The opening question dropped like a match on dry grass. Should state attorneys general be allowed to override federal mandates on civil rights? Pam went first. She launched into a rehearsed, fiery monologue about state power, constitutional limits, and liberal overreach. Her delivery was fast, loud, and dripping with condescension. When it was Jessica's turn, she began quietly, too quietly for Pam's taste. Pam smirked, exaggeratedly placing a hand to her ear as if to say, "Speak up, sweetheart." The crowd laughed nervously. Jessica didn't break. Her calm, deliberate tone carried more weight than Pam's theatrics. "If the Constitution is your argument, Pam," she said, "you might want to read the parts you skipped." The audience gasped. Greg raised his eyebrows. The first shot had been fired. Pam leaned back, unimpressed, but a flicker of irritation crossed her face. She hadn't expected Jessica to come out that clean and sharp. The tension was set. Pam Bondi wasn't used to being challenged so early, especially not by Jessica Tarlov. She leaned forward, her smile tightening into something sharper. "Well," she said with faux sweetness, "I guess law school at Oxford gives you a different view of the U.S. Constitution." Laughter rippled through parts of the audience, exactly the reaction Pam wanted. She thrived on mockery, on getting the crowd on her side through snide little digs. Jessica didn't flinch. She let the laughter die down, then raised her gaze to meet Pam's with unwavering focus. "Actually," Jessica replied, her tone measured but cutting, "Oxford teaches critical thinking. You should try it sometime." The room gasped again, louder this time. Greg Gutfeld's smirk widened, he knew he was sitting on live television gold. Pam straightened her blazer, a subtle sign that the joke had landed deeper than she wanted to admit. She came back swinging, accusing Jessica of being out of touch with real Americans, and spending too much time in ivory towers to understand state sovereignty. She gestured dramatically with her hands, pacing her words like a seasoned prosecutor. But Jessica had something Pam didn't: composure. "Pam," she said calmly, "you spent years as Attorney General arguing to strip people of basic protections. Don't confuse loudness with correctness. The Constitution doesn't bend to your talking points." Her words were precise, her rhythm steady, every sentence hitting like a carefully aimed dart. The camera cut to the audience. Some were nodding. Others leaned forward in their seats, sensing something rare, a debate where the underdog wasn't folding. Greg jumped in to stir the pot. "Pam," he teased, "are you going to let Jessica school you like this on live TV?" Pam forced a laugh, but her eyes gave her away. She wasn't laughing anymore. The playful confidence from the opening had begun to erode. Jessica hadn't just answered her. She had dismantled her veneer piece by piece, and it was only the second round. Pam decided then, she would try to humiliate Jessica. She leaned back with the kind of grin that precedes a punch. "Oh, don't worry," she said into her mic, "I've got plenty to say." The real clash was about to begin. Pam Bondi adjusted her microphone with a deliberate slowness, letting the suspense thicken. Her grin widened, not the friendly kind, but the calculated smile of someone who thought she had her opponent cornered. She turned slightly toward the live audience, performing more for them than for Jessica. "You know," Pam began, her voice syrupy sweet, "people like Jessica always think they're the smartest in the room. They use fancy words, big schools, and pretend they're standing up for the little guy. But let's be honest, she's never lived a day in the real world." The crowd murmured. A few clapped. Pam was in her element, mocking, belittling, trying to paint Jessica as an out-of-touch elitist. She leaned closer to Jessica, lowering her tone to sound more authentic. "I've been in courtrooms defending this country. Jessica's been in classrooms critiquing people like me." Greg Gutfeld laughed loudly, egging her on. "Pam, don't hold back now," he teased. Pam shot him a look that said "I won't." Jessica sat still, hands folded neatly on the desk. No eye roll, no smirk, just focus. She waited until the audience's laughter faded. Then, in a voice as calm as it was sharp, she replied, "Pam, the last time I checked, defending this country doesn't mean picking which parts of the law you like and tossing out the rest." The laughter stopped. Pam blinked, caught off guard by the surgical precision of the response. Jessica continued, her tone unwavering. "And let's not pretend courtroom theatrics equal moral authority. If real world means ignoring constitutional rights to score political points, then maybe we need more classrooms and fewer power trips." A wave of gasps swept the studio. Even Greg momentarily froze. Pam's confident smirk faltered for a split second. She hadn't expected Jessica to come right back at her so cleanly, and with the crowd now paying full attention, the stakes had shifted. Jessica leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal strength without aggression. "Mocking doesn't make you right, Pam. It just makes the silence after your punchline louder." The audience broke into spontaneous applause. Pam forced a smile, but the mask was cracking. Her attempt to humiliate Jessica had landed flat, and the backlash was building. Pam Bondi felt the momentum slipping, and she didn't like it. The applause for Jessica's comeback wasn't just unexpected, it was humiliating. She leaned back in her chair for a beat, then abruptly leaned forward again, her tone sharper, her words faster, like a prosecutor going in for a cross-examination. "Oh, so now you're the defender of constitutional purity?" Pam snapped, her voice rising just enough to sound authoritative. "Give me a break, Jessica. You sit here and lecture everyone like you've lived through the battles we've fought. I've stood in real courtrooms, not TV studios, fighting real criminals. Meanwhile, you hide behind your talking points, playing the part of America's moral compass." The crowd gave a few uneasy chuckles. Pam mistook it for approval and pressed harder. "You're just another media liberal who thinks being condescending is the same thing as being right. But the American people aren't buying it. They see through your act." She turned to the audience, gesturing widely, trying to rally them. "Don't you?" For a moment, the studio was quiet, not because they agreed, but because the tone had shifted from banter to hostility. Greg Gutfeld's grin tightened. Even he sensed the edge in Pam's words. Jessica didn't match Pam's volume. She didn't need to. She waited for the noise to settle, then calmly looked Pam in the eye. "Pam," she said evenly, "you keep talking about real battles. But let's be honest, most of those battles were about limiting people's rights, not protecting them. You're not a soldier on the front lines. You were a politician in a courtroom, picking winners and losers depending on who fit your agenda." The audience reacted instantly, gasps, then applause. Greg raised his eyebrows, clearly enjoying the drama. Pam shifted uncomfortably but tried to recover. "You think you can sit there and question my integrity?" she fired back. Jessica didn't hesitate. "I don't have to question it," she replied. "Your record speaks louder than I ever could." That line hit like a hammer. Pam's face tightened, her smile vanishing entirely. The balance of power on stage had flipped. She had started this debate expecting to humiliate Jessica. But now, under the harsh lights and live broadcast, it was Pam who was on the defensive. Jessica leaned slightly toward the mic, her voice lower but cutting. "Pam, if you want to talk about real America, let's talk about the people who lose when politicians like you treat justice like a game." The crowd erupted in applause again, louder this time. Pam's plan to dominate was crumbling, and everyone could see it. Pam Bondi knew she was cornered. Her confident posture began to betray subtle cracks, a tightened jaw, restless hands, eyes darting toward the moderator for backup that wasn't coming. But she wasn't ready to fold. Not yet. "Jessica," Pam began, her tone dropping into a mock sympathetic register, "I get it. You're great with words. You've got the crowd eating out of your hand. But rhetoric doesn't change facts. The fact is, while I was holding criminals accountable, you were holding microphones. You talk like an expert, but you've never carried the weight of responsibility. You're an analyst, not a leader." The audience murmured, sensing she was trying to claw back control. But Jessica didn't flinch. She sat upright, calm, almost surgical in her focus. "Pam," she said, with a slight, knowing smile, "you keep confusing loudness with leadership. And if you think holding power makes you right, maybe that's why so many of your decisions ended up overturned in court." The crowd gasped audibly. A few people even clapped mid-sentence. Pam's face flushed as Jessica continued, voice firm but measured. "You talk about responsibility like it's something I've never had. But responsibility isn't about titles, it's about honesty. And you've spent a lot of time defending power, not questioning it." Pam tried to interject, but Jessica raised her hand slightly, not rudely, but with the authority of someone who had just taken command of the stage. "No, let me finish," she said. "You're right about one thing, I've never been a prosecutor. But I've held people like you accountable, live, in front of millions. And tonight's no different." The audience burst into applause, this time sustained and intense. Even Greg Gutfeld, usually quick to back up Bondi, leaned back with a grin that said, "She's in trouble." Pam tried one last jab, leaning forward with a smirk. "You think you've got the moral high ground, Jessica? The real world isn't Twitter. It's not about snappy comebacks." Jessica didn't miss a beat. "Exactly," she replied. "It's about truth. And in the real world, truth doesn't need to shout to win." The studio fell silent, the kind of silence that carries weight. Pam blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. For the first time that night, the roles had reversed completely. She had entered this exchange trying to humiliate Jessica. But now, it was her credibility hanging by a thread. Pam Bondi leaned back in her chair, confident, her smirk sharp like a knife. Up until this point, she had thrown jab after jab, convinced she could keep Jessica Tarlov on the defensive. But Jessica wasn't flinching, she was waiting. As Pam delivered yet another smug line about Jessica's lack of real-world experience, Jessica calmly adjusted her mic, leaned forward, and locked eyes with her opponent. The studio lights seemed to sharpen, and the chatter in the audience faded into an expectant hush. "Pam," Jessica began, her tone calm but cutting, "it's funny to hear lectures about the real world from someone who spent most of her career protecting power, not challenging it." The crowd reacted audibly, some gasps, some laughs. Pam's smirk faltered for the first time. Jessica didn't stop. "You talk like the law is some sacred, untouchable force," she continued, "but for years, people like you have used the law to silence everyday Americans. You call it nuance. I call it hiding behind legal language to avoid accountability." Pam tried to interject, "That's a gross oversimplification." Jessica raised a hand slightly, not rudely, but with commanding presence. "No, Pam. What's gross is how many lives get ignored while people like you debate the phrasing of justice instead of its reality. The audience broke into applause. It wasn't a polite reaction, it was an eruption. The power dynamics on stage shifted palpably. Pam, sensing the momentum slipping, crossed her arms, clearly irritated. For the first time, Jessica wasn't just responding, she was leading. And everyone in that studio could feel it. Pam Bondi recognized that her usual aggressive tactics were failing. The audience was no longer on her side. So she switched strategies. Sitting up straighter, she softened her tone as if to reclaim control. "Look, Jessica," Pam said smoothly, "some of what you say might sound compelling, but the world isn't black and white. This isn't some high school debate. Policy requires nuance and maturity, not slogans." Jessica didn't flinch. She leaned in, her voice unwavering. "Nuance isn't the same as hiding behind complexity, Pam. People are tired of leaders using nuance as an excuse to do nothing. If calling for honesty is immature, then maybe Washington could use a little immaturity." The audience laughed and applauded simultaneously. Pam's attempt at a pivot wasn't working. Jessica pressed further, her delivery crisp and sharp. "You say this is about being mature," she said, "but maturity isn't measured by how eloquently you dodge responsibility. It's measured by whether you tell people the truth, even when it's inconvenient." Pam tried to regain footing. "You have no idea what real responsibility looks like." Jessica cut her off with perfect timing. "No, Pam. What I do know is what accountability looks like. And that's exactly what's happening to you right now." The crowd exploded. Jessica had cornered her, not with volume, but with precision. Pam's polished exterior was cracking under the weight of Jessica's relentless composure. Pam Bondi took a deep breath. Her earlier arrogance had dissolved into visible frustration. She straightened in her chair, eyes narrowing. "Jessica," she said, her voice hardening, "you get to sit here and criticize because you've never had to make real decisions. You've never held actual power. You can say whatever sounds good without facing the consequences." Jessica didn't even blink. Her tone dropped, calm but lethal. "Pam, the problem isn't that I haven't held power. The problem is that people like you have, and you've failed to use it for the people who need it most." The audience erupted again. Jessica continued, her rhythm flawless. "You call my words easy. But standing up to power while you're sitting in it, that's what's hard. And that's what you've never done." Pam shook her head. "That's just rhetoric." Jessica leaned in slightly, her voice steady. "No. That's reality." The audience reaction drowned out Pam's weak rebuttal. The moderator tried to calm things down, but it was useless. The studio belonged to Jessica now. Jessica finished with the kind of line that lives forever on social media clips. "You came here to belittle me, Pam. But you're not just facing Jessica Tarlov tonight. You're facing every person who's tired of being talked down to by people who think power equals truth. It doesn't." The room erupted in a standing ovation. Pam sat back, deflated. The battle wasn't just lost, it had been exposed. By this point, the energy in the studio was no longer balanced. Jessica Tarlov wasn't just holding her own, she was running the conversation, shaping the tone, and commanding the audience's attention. Pam Bondi, who had entered the debate confident and cocky, now sat with her arms crossed, her expression tight. She had underestimated Jessica, and it was too late to reverse course. Pam tried one last defensive move. "Jessica," she said, her voice edged with irritation, "you make it sound like people in power are villains. That's not how the real world works. Governing isn't about throwing accusations, it's about making tough choices. Something you clearly don't understand." Jessica tilted her head slightly, like a teacher listening to a student give the wrong answer. "Pam," she said evenly, "I don't think people in power are automatically villains. But when they use power to protect themselves instead of the people, they become part of the problem. And that's exactly what you've done for years. The crowd reacted with a collective, "Oh," followed by applause. Jessica leaned closer to the mic. "You talk about tough choices, but the truth is, most of the time, you and people like you don't make tough choices, you avoid them. And when someone calls that out, suddenly it's naive or populist. No, Pam. It's called honesty." Pam opened her mouth to respond, but the audience's reaction drowned her out. Jessica didn't wait. She continued, driving her point like a nail into wood. "You built your career on looking down on people who didn't speak your language. Your legal jargon, your political spin. But guess what? People are done being spoken down to. And they don't need a law degree to recognize hypocrisy when they see it." The studio burst into cheers. Even the moderator, who had been nervously trying to maintain neutrality, glanced at Jessica with a look that said, "You just changed the entire temperature of this debate." Pam sat there, visibly uncomfortable, realizing that every attempt to reassert control was only making Jessica's dominance more obvious. Jessica leaned back slightly, not arrogantly, but with the ease of someone who knew she had landed every point. The moment wasn't just a victory, it was a dismantling. And the audience knew it. Clips of this exchange were destined to explode online before the night was over. The studio lights burned brighter as the debate neared its end. The tension, which had simmered for nearly an hour, had now crystallized into a single undeniable reality: Jessica Tarlov had owned the night. Pam Bondi, once so composed and sure of herself, sat silent, her earlier smirk replaced by a clenched jaw and a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. The moderator cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Final thoughts, ladies?" he asked. Pam adjusted her blazer and gave a forced smile. "I think the American people understand that governing requires more than emotional soundbites," she said. But her voice lacked the conviction it once carried. Then it was Jessica's turn. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. She took a slow breath, leaned toward the mic, and looked directly at Pam. Then at the camera. "Pam," she began calmly, "you came here expecting to talk at me. But what happened tonight is that America talked back." The crowd erupted in applause, some even rising to their feet. Jessica continued, her tone sharp but not shouting, like a scalpel, not a hammer. "For too long, power has been treated like a one-way conversation. People like you set the rules, tell the stories, and expect the rest of us to just listen. But that's not how democracy works. Not anymore. You tried to humiliate me. Instead, you reminded people why voices like mine, and theirs, matter." Pam looked down, blinking hard, as the audience roared. Jessica turned back to the camera for her final line, her voice steady and clear. "If speaking the truth makes some people uncomfortable, good. Maybe that's where real change begins." The room exploded. Standing ovations. Shouts. The moderator, completely overrun by the energy, simply nodded and let it happen. Pam shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly realizing the debate had slipped far beyond her control. Jessica didn't bask in the applause. She simply leaned back, hands folded, composed, a picture of calm power. This wasn't just a debate win. It was a moment. The kind that would be clipped, shared, and replayed millions of times. Within minutes, hashtags began to surge, hashtag Tarlov owns Pam, hashtag mic drop moment, hashtag Jessica Tarlov LIV. What had started as a debate had turned into a cultural flashpoint. And Jessica Tarlov? She just sat there, quietly, as the studio thundered around her, knowing she had spoken not just for herself, but for millions watching. Tonight wasn't just about winning a debate, it was about drawing a line. For too long, powerful voices have spoken down to people like it's a one-way conversation. But when someone like Jessica Tarlov steps up and speaks truth to power, that conversation changes. Pam Bondi came in expecting control. She left realizing that the audience, the country, and the truth don't bend that easily. Jessica didn't just answer, she owned every moment with clarity, strength, and poise. And that's what this channel is all about. Exposing hypocrisy, amplifying real voices, and never backing down when the truth needs to be heard.